Ready to roll?
Yes, I think.
Oh, yeah, you are.
Oh, God.
Yeah, you
Won't be shouting? Yeah, okay.
Amy.
Okay, hello. Hello, hi. My name's Amy, and I'm a DevOps engineer in Aflac. And this is really exciting. So this is actually the first Women Tech Makers event I've ever been to. So I'm thrilled and honoured to be part of such an amazing lineup of women representing the Belfast tech scene. And there's some fantastic talks coming up, so I'm so excited. And not only that, this is actually a first for me. So I have never spoken to this many people before. My people leader, my manager's in the audience, so I'm going to try and make sure it's not the last time either, hopefully. But yeah, so it's such a privilege to talk to you today about some of the work that I've been involved with as part of the DevOps platform team in Aflac. So for those that don't know, Aflac is a supplemental health insurance. So we provide supplemental health insurance. And what that is we cover medical expenses that are beyond standard health insurance in both the Japanese and US markets. So what we do is we hand out cash to our customers in their greatest time of need. So that cash could go towards transportation costs or loss of earnings that are a result of illness or injury. And like many large insurance companies, Aflac was kind of behind the times in terms of tech, and that's where Belfast comes in. So we're an innovation hub, and we're providing brilliant solutions and embedding security in order to help those customers during that time of need. So I started with Aflac just over a year ago, and as a young woman in tech, I'm only really starting out. I graduated just over 2 years ago, and I've been so thankful for the experience I've had so far. Being part of a team that has built an internal platform from the ground up, an internal platform that is already having a significant impact on the efficiency and productivity of our product teams. And it's that story I'd like to tell you about today. Taking a real business problem and solving it through innovation, integration, and smart systems thinking, scaling DevOps through developer self-service. So our mission as part of the DevOps platform team in Aflac is to enable product teams to practice true DevOps practices and principles. So just as a bit of show of hands here, would you mind putting your hand up if you know what DevOps is? Oh, it's quite a lot. Okay, right, brilliant. So for those with their hands down, hopefully do not fear. If I do my job right, you'll know by the end of this. But DevOps is actually incredibly hard to define, as it encompasses so much, and it could be a 30-minute talk in itself, so I'm going to try and not bore you with that. But in Aflac, we view DevOps as the combination of practices, principles, and tools that are designed to increase an organization's ability to deliver better value sooner, safer, and happier. So what does this mean? So better is better quality, so you're producing better quality solutions. Value, that's quite personal to the organization, so it depends on what you're wanting to give out to your customers. Sooner, that's your time to market, so you're getting that value early and often. Safer, your solutions are more compliant and security aware. And then happier, that's obviously your customers as you're getting better quality solutions and you're getting them faster, but also your colleagues and developers as you're working on these better quality solutions. Okay, so we're not making this up. So research has shown that organizations that are mature in their DevOps journey are able to deploy hundreds of times per day. And in an age where competitive advantage requires fast time to market and relentless experimentation, this really isn't something that we can ignore. So these are some brilliant outcomes. So how do we do that, right? And behind me, this is the DevOps continuum. And DevOps was founded on the principle that everything is continuous. So you're continuously learning, you're continuously improving, and that means that you're never really done. So software feeds its way through this cycle, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of step through a couple of the stages in this cycle and call out some of those DevOps practices and principles that we want product teams in Aflac to follow, and then of course always sort of tying it back to the why and what the outcome of that is. Okay, so first starting off with continuous integration. And this is sometimes misconceived as just automated pipelines, but there's so much more to it. So this is actually the practice where developers regularly merge their code into the main or trunk branch at least once a day. So this means that developers are working in small batches, so you're getting that value early and often. And whenever you're working in these small batches, you're working on small feature branches. And on each and every commit to one of those small feature branches, an automated build is triggered. And if this build were to fail, then the developer is immediately notified and can fix that up straight away. And part of the build phase, something that we can include, is static application security testing. And what this does, it's simply just a tool that sort of scans your source code, it'll look for known vulnerabilities, and then highlight that to the developer at the time of working on that. So it kind of means that you can catch issues a lot earlier on. As part of that build phase, a suite of automated tests should be ran. So this can be integration or unit tests. And similarly to how the build works, if any of those tests fail, then the developer is immediately notified, you can fix it up. And that means that you're not breaking any existing functionality. So in theory now, you've done the hard bit. You've coded it, you've tested it, you're ready to go. And you want to release. And I would say a few people here today have been to what's known as a Change Advisory Board meeting. It's a CAB meeting. And for those that don't know, it's a meeting that maybe happens, say, once or twice a week. It's maybe an hour of your time. And you go to this meeting and you do like a one-liner on what your change is. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's just always approved. And you sort of come off it and you're like, what's the point in that? I've just had to wait like a week to get something out. So we're really pushing for automated change management. And if we have our test and governance in place, that means we should be allowed to release on demand. Then in terms of the deployment, we're really pushing for automated deployment through pipelines. And this actually is safer. So that means our solutions are safer as we're deploying the same way each and every time to each and every environment. And this should apply to our infrastructure as well. So if we can deploy our code, that's great. But if we can deploy our infrastructure to each and every environment the same way, we can then deploy our code that runs on top of that. Then, once your code's in production, you're no longer throwing it over a wall to an operations team to look after. If you've built it, that means that you run it and you own it. And then finally, monitoring. So it's obviously really important that we monitor our applications when they're in production. And it's even more important that the outcomes of that monitoring are easily accessible to all. So everyone needs to be able to see it. And any issues that are found are then fed right back into our backlog. And that's sort of where the loop comes in. So that'll be going back into that planning stage. So that's great. So we knew what we wanted to do. So we wanted to enable teams, product teams in Aflac to follow these practices and principles. We knew why, because of these brilliant outcomes. And we knew how we were going to do it through these principles. So what was stopping us? Well, in order for a developer to begin on that continuum, you had to be onboarded onto what was known as the DevOps toolchain. And this is simply just a set of tools that are designed to aid a developer while starting to practice those. And 12 months ago in Aflac, onboarding a developer to that toolchain took, now this is going to sound a bit strange, but bear with me, took the same amount of time on average that it would take for anybody here to eat 16,560 sandwiches, right? And I know it sounds a bit strange, but 16,560 sandwiches, and that's non-stop. I didn't even factor in sleeping time, right? So that's non-stop munching. And what we've taken that down to, as I stand here today, is the same amount of time it takes you to eat one sandwich. And nobody time me at lunch, as I'll probably be wolfing it into me. But yeah, so for those that don't really like sandwiches, what does that mean? So that process took up to 23 days, right? And we have now taken that process down to less than 2 minutes. And I think that's pretty impressive, even if I say so myself, right? And so 23 days was obviously far from ideal. And it certainly wasn't sort of compatible with our mission to get everybody doing this. So we knew that 95% of teams were navigating old, clunky legacy tooling. And it was making it hard for teams to even get started on their DevOps journey. So as we, as a DevOps platform team, began to engage with product teams, we started to see the true extent of the impediments. And we recognized that the journey from new recruit to productive developer had a ton of complexities and lots of things blocking the road to get started. So the first and most obvious blocker was getting access. And I'm sure we've all been there. You've maybe started a new team or a new job, and you're absolutely raring to go. Like you want to get your first bit of work out and show everybody what you're about, and you don't have access to the tool you need to do it. And it's really frustrating. It's really annoying. So how it works in Aflac, it's a large enterprise. And it's not like a wee startup where the person beside me maybe has admin rights on every tool. So what you have to do is you have to raise a ticket or a service request to get something done. And that ticket is then put onto a queue, and then that's sent to your manager for approval. You wait for an approval, and then that ticket was sent to a centralized team in order for them to manually, but possibly inconsistently, fulfill that request. So this here is what the DevOps toolchain was and stood as. And you can see that there's this developer, and she's having to raise a service request for each and every one of these tools. So that would be GitHub, which is our source control, Azure DevOps, which is our build and deploy tool, SonarQube, which is our code scanning tool, Veracode, which is our security scanning tool, and then Artifactory, which is our artifact repository. So each and every one of these required a separate ticket, separate service request, had to be raised, manually approved, and then manually fulfilled. We then found that once teams were on these tools, there was this steep learning curve in order to get these tools to work together and configured to work in harmony. And this wasn't helped with a lack of consistency and maybe understanding of what good looks like from a DevOps standpoint. So teams weren't using any common standards or patterns. And this isn't necessarily just, technical standards and patterns, but also something that could seem as trivial as naming conventions across these tools. So that meant for stakeholders such as audit and compliance that it was a manual, laborious task to piece together what belonged to what. And then finally, there was a lack of guardrails in place. So this meant that security became unnecessarily complex. So we recognised that until this route was cleared, truly scaling DevOps across Aflac would be tricky. So the challenge was set. How do we remove or abstract that complexity behind something that is easy and compelling to use? And as a team, we didn't want to provide like a short-term fix and just sort of put a sticking plaster over the problem. We could have created a bunch of scripts and ran them manually, but uncovering the inefficiencies in the system provided us with a brilliant opportunity. And it was an opportunity to innovate and create a truly scalable solution. And so forth. It would be a solution that would not only solve that onboarding process, but also how developers interact with the DevOps platform. So that means that we're moving away from this isolated tool chain where we treat every tool independently into a single unified platform. And so our developer experience platform, Devex, was born. So we had the freedom to build out Devex however we wished. We went for a microservice-based architecture in mind. So that was leveraging the aggregator pattern. And how this works at a really high level is you have the client or user, and they speak to the aggregator, and then the aggregator makes underlying calls to these underlying services. The services then talk back to the aggregator, but what the aggregator then does is it bundles up the responses from these underlying services as a single request back to the user. And this really gives us that abstraction layer that we were after. So with Devex, that's our abstraction layer, it calls our underlying services, and we call each of these services an interaction API. And the interaction API's sole job is just to talk to the tool below it. So that's all it has to do. And this means that it's actually really easy for us to swap these out. So say if Aflac tomorrow decided to change their code scanning tool, we could unplug SonarCube, create a new one, and plug it back in, and that's not affecting the rest of the platform. So each interaction API or service is a Java Spring Boot application. It's deployed to EKS, which is Elastic Kubernetes Service, and hosted in AWS. Our UI is a Swagger UI, which exposes our underlying APIs for use. And it's certainly not the end goal. We certainly have we're sort of in development of a UI being built out with Angular. And the way this works, so by having the aggregator talking to the services, to talk to the tools, it gives us a consistent way of talking to each tool each and every time. And the flow of it all really starts over on the left with GitHub. And in GitHub, we leverage templates, which have those guardrails and standards baked in. And then each repository in GitHub, if applicable, will have an Azure DevOps pipeline, and that pipeline is stored as code. And within that pipeline, you have those integrations with SonarCube, Veracode, and Artifactory. So each GitHub repository template is based on a tech stack. So for example, with Devex, we would have a Java, Maven, which is our build tool, and our deployment target, which is Kubernetes. And we recognize that not every team in Aflac is going to want to follow a specific set of tool. They're going to want to innovate and think outside of the box. And we never want to stint innovation. So in that case, that's grand. They can just use a generic template, go and create brilliant solutions, but still doing things with DevOps and these standards in place. So how did we, as a development team, build out Devex? So we're obviously part of the DevOps platform team, and we had to really practice what we preach, so it was a little bit of pressure. But we use CI and CD pipelines in Azure DevOps. So CI is continuous integration, and CD was continuous deployment. Pipelines in Azure DevOps to build, test, and deploy our application. And this also includes our infrastructure in AWS. In terms of testing, we really wanted to follow a shift-left testing mentality. So we recognized that the further right in this diagram that we would find issues, the harder it was going to be for us to fix those. So we have a unit test percentage that if we don't hit, our pipelines just automatically fail. We use mocks in lower environments to test expected and unexpected flows. which means that we have confidence when running our test suites that nothing unexpected will crop up in production. And then we have an automated test framework built out with Robot, and I don't know if everyone knows what Robot is, but it's basically just this automated test framework. It's built on top of Python. It's brilliant. It's really easy to use. And that also includes post-deployment testing to each and every environment. So when we were in the early days of Devex and we just had that GitHub service running, we really wanted to get feedback from users as soon as possible. So we ran a customer zero workshop, and that was carrying out usability testing. And I think we got like 8 or 9 people in a wee room, and they were all from different backgrounds, different job titles. And we went into that wanting to answer 3 questions. So we wanted to know, how easy is it to navigate the Swagger UI and use those APIs? Are the responses from the APIs clear? And does the user understand what happened when things went wrong? So we recorded their screens, we asked them to think out loud. Why are they going to certain parts of the screen? What did they think would happen compared to what actually did happen? And what we found from the get-go was that Swagger UI was not the most intuitive experience for most. And to be honest, we sort of knew that going in. But, hey-ho, it was just sort of seen as this interim step before we get that fully fledged UI in. But something interesting that we did find that was sort of beyond the limitations of Swagger was that users weren't familiar with our terms or the language that we were using on our front end. So what that meant was they weren't able to actually carry out some of those basic scenarios that we sort of presumed that they would. And, this was quite humbling, I have to be honest, because we'd sort of been working on Devex for a few months. We sort of thought we had it all sussed. It turns out we didn't. These things happen. And we were able to sort of, as we work in such an agile environment, we were able to pivot, revisit our assumptions, and go make those tweaks as to how those certain user flows would work. Okay, so what we have built out so far has removed that initial blocker, right? That first initial blocker of getting access. So now developers can get what they want when they need it, and they can get this with all of those standards in place. So with a single API call, we've taken up to 23 days down to less than 2 minutes. But we've also taken 5 service requests down to 0 service requests. And this has all truly been done by codifying standards and guardrails. So these standards are no longer sitting in an ancient SharePoint somewhere and nobody ever has the link or the link's broken. You don't even need to think about them anymore. They're just there. And I do think that, sometimes an internal product is seen as maybe not being quite so impactful or as useful. And I think hopefully numbers like this disprove that. As, one, it's easier to get started with an internal product. As your customers are internal, you can get that feedback really quick. But also, in terms of further down the chain, externally, they're going to be getting more if we're producing more internally. Okay, so looking to the future of Devex. Well, this is all still pretty new. We started development of this in September. And I'm sure anybody here today in a large enterprise, I'm sure you're aware when you're building out something like this, you're going to encounter loads of external dependencies. So we had to raise a lot of tickets ourselves to get stuff done. And it definitely added fuel to the fire. We were walking in the shoes of our customers. But what was interesting was every external dependency that we came across, we always came back to the same question of, could Devex automate this? And usually the answer was yes. So then our backlog just continued to grow. So we really do assume that we're going to get a lot of benefit from having an intuitive workflow-based UI. So that's our first stop, is we're going to get that UI out. And we're working with user experience in Aflac to make sure that it's easy and nice to use. And then I mentioned earlier that Devex is deployed to EKS, and that's Elastic Kubernetes Service, and hosted in AWS, and that's underlying with EC2 instances, so that's just basic compute behind that. And we have plans to eventually move to an entirely serverless architecture. So what this would mean would be replacing EKS with EC2 with AWS Fargate, and that is AWS's serverless containerization option. So this wouldn't only give us a more scalable and resilient architecture, but it would also give us a more cost-effective one, further reducing that total cost of ownership for the platform. So we really don't want Devex to just be an onboarding tool, right? We want it to be somewhere that developers come every day. We want it to be that one-stop shop. And because Devex is so application-centric, it means that we have loads of metrics and data about each and every application. So going back to this continuum, where Devex is today, it allows you to begin on this continuum. You can get started, you can go and have a go, right? But looking to the future, we really want to expose metrics from each and every stage in here to users and teams in order for them to understand more about their application and where they could possibly focus those continuous improvement efforts. So here's just some, not all, but just some of the metrics that we've thought about. And these are lower level leading indicators of a team's performance. And, I'm not going to talk through them all, but some interesting ones would be deployment frequency. So we could expose the deployment frequency to each and every environment for a team in order for them to understand and possibly see where possible bottlenecks or impediments may lie. Another interesting one would be change failure rate. So out of all of your deployments that go to production, how many are breaking something? And then if something were to break, how long does it take for you to get back to green and get back to things working? And that would be your mean time to recover. So there's tons, right? There's loads of data that we could pluck out and get in a nice centralized place for teams to be able to learn more about their application, but also share that with stakeholders to see how you're getting on. Okay, so now that we have Devex, how do we make sure that we're actually making a difference? How are we going to measure that? And that's where our North Star metric comes in. And a North Star metric is simply just a core metric that really captures your value that you deliver to your customers. So Spotify's, I think it's the average time spent listening to music, and Airbnb's is the average number of nights booked. And for the DevOps platform, now it's wordy, so bear with me, and it's also a ratio, but it is the number of deployments through a compliant pipeline, and that pipeline is created with Devex, over the number of incidents and requests that are raised against the platform. So what's a compliant pipeline? Well, that's just a pipeline that has Aflac standards codified within. An incident, this is raised when something unforeseen happens to the platform. So say something goes down and users are impacted. And then a request, well, this is raised when somebody needs something from the platform. And we're obviously in the game of reducing these and have sort of interchanged tickets and requests. So usually how a presentation like this would go is you would see what that metric was and where we are now. And I'm going to be really honest and tell you that we didn't do everything in the right order. So we're continually improving ourselves as well. And this is something we thought about after the fact. And, it's going to be really interesting, hopefully by incorporating UX and product and engineering and DevOps, we are really trying to be that gold star for Aflac. And as Devex expands and scales, it'll be interesting to see how these numbers move accordingly. So if Devex is truly self-service, the number of tickets or requests should go down. And as Devex has all of those standards out of the box, the number of incidents should go down. And then, of course, as more use Devex and it expands, the number of deployments should go up. Okay, so that's Devex. We're certainly not the first, nor will we be the last people to be doing this. So you can see this is taken from the State of DevOps Report 2021. And there's a high correlation between teams and organizations that are mature or high in their DevOps evolution with those using internal platforms. And one of the key takeaways from the report was platform teams are key to success at scale. And I challenge you to think if an internal developer platform, possibly providing self-service, could help weave and scale DevOps across your organization. So if this has sparked your interest, I put together like 3 wee tips, like 3 wee things to get started. And this is just in my humble opinion from my experience. And if maybe I was to go back and do this again, what would I do differently? And first would be to start really small, to go as granular as you can possibly get. So for example, if you were to go down that onboarding use case, pick one tool, but even further than that, pick like one feature of that tool, measure it, see how you get on, see how people like it. Secondly, it would be to learn from our mistakes and get that baseline metric in place. It's going to really help when selling this to stakeholders. And then finally, it would be architect for the unknown. So don't constrain your solution before you've even got started, and be prepared to extend it and move it wherever you may need to go. So that's me. I really hope you've enjoyed hearing about Devex and what we're all about and how we got to where we are. And I hope you've enjoyed hearing about it as much as I've enjoyed doing it. Like, I've honestly had a ball. I can't even tell you enough. But yeah, I think I have a few minutes left if anybody has any questions. Oh, surprise.
Thanks for a really interesting presentation. I just want to ask, so the tools that sit within your Devex platform, how do you have plans to extend these and how do you see it looking?
Okay, right. So we do have plans to sort of extend it out. So obviously we want to extend it with the monitoring side of things. So that would be adding sort of like how you saw those tools, adding a bolt-on of Dynatrace, which is our monitoring platform. But another interesting one would be we have an on-premise Kubernetes platform that we can deploy to. And we could bolt that on as an onboarding feature. So what that would mean for teams that deploy there, it would be like an end-to-end start. You'd get everything sort of set in place. And we could give them, their Kubernetes namespace. We could give them access to each of the namespaces in each environment. And then also place quotas on those namespaces. So it would allow you to be all ready and set up. Yeah, thanks.
Any others? Oh, yep.
Could you pass that down? Thank you.
Hi, I'm just wondering, aware it's a very large organization and you're operating here in Northern Ireland. Are there, just internally, has there been any resistance or competing approaches, or, I don't know, do you feel like there's been any, I suppose, internal resistance to this approach?
Definitely, yeah. I think that, nobody really likes change. And it might be, for some people, it's easier almost to just raise a ticket and forget about it, and you don't have to do anything. But what we're really trying to push and sort of show the value of, if you can have that self-service, it means you can just go and do whatever you want at any time. So it's been quite, it's not, I wouldn't say hard, but it's definitely been challenging to try and promote it. And I guess you're sort of trying to sell this to people, really, aren't you, to try and get people to come onto it. And especially because it's a new platform, there's always going to be a couple of little kinks and issues that you've got to sort of work through. But our teams are awfully nice. Everyone's happy to work through it and give us the feedback that we need. So yeah, sort of, but we're trying our best.
Any others? No? All right.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Emily.
you very much. Thank you. Thanks.